Hello, everyone.
Welcome to Chai Hack Night number 408. I'm co-host number 1, Claire Micklin, and this is Emily Drebitz, co-host number 2. And tonight we are hosting the presentation for tracking COVID-19 in Illinois from the spread to reopening policies with the Asraa Mustufa, Chicago Reporter, David Eads, former Chicago Reporter, editor, and Paula Friedrich from WBEZ. So I'm pretty excited.
I am also excited. So glad that you all are here from the safety and comfort of your own homes or some sort of horrible transportation experience where you're listening to this perhaps live through headphones. Either way, we're happy that you're here, and we're going to have this lovely presentation, and we hope that you will stick around for after the presentation. There's going to be some live Q&A as well as another Zoom call after the Q&A that will be the civic hacking portion of the evening. So if you have a question for the Q&A session, please ask via our YouTube live chat. And as a friendly reminder, I know you all will be respectful, but please be respectful. Our code of conduct will be strictly enforced, and we ask for your consideration in posting appropriate questions.
Yes.
And yeah, Claire, do you want to go ahead and move on to some of the other stuff?
Okay, so join the Chai Hack Night Slack. That's where everything happens. Most things except, Zoom things also happen. But yeah, you can sign up at the link, Slack, HTTP, that stuff, slackme.chaihacknight.org. Lots of fun channels. You can be amused for hours, and yeah, it's like, ways to communicate are limited. So maybe you should just get in Slack now.
Try it out. Announcements. Chai Hack Night is a weekly event, pandemic or no. So please join us for our upcoming presentations on August 11th, 18th, and the 1st. We have some fantastic speakers, including Cook County Public Defender Amy Campanelli and 49th Ward Alderwoman Maria Haddon and Maria Chenoir in Victoria Law, discussing prison by any other name.
Let's see. Oh, look at this. This is exciting. So we now have a Chai Hack Night help desk, and you can, it looks like you can request help. It's pro bono tech and data assistance to people and organizations in Chicagoland who request it. This sounds like you are a person or one of those other things. So yeah, you can just take this form. It's at this bit.ly link, request help. I won't read the link, but it's CHN help desk. And then you can sign up to volunteer. Like if you have a skill that we need, sounds like you can be there on the other end of the help desk in case, you don't do enough support tickets at work. Here's another way to answer tickets, but in a nice way. It's a Hack Night way.
Also, folks, please go ahead. Do not delay. Register to vote by mail. Here are some helpful links for you to do that with. I've already done it. It's very fun, and I'm looking forward to getting my ballot and voting as soon as I can without leaving my home, except for to mail it.
Me too. I haven't done that registration yet, but I definitely should. Ooh, here's something you should do. Fill out your census and tell everyone you know to do it too. It's the only way to be counted and for, I don't know, the government to know you exist. So it's my2020census.gov. Response rates to date, Chicago is lagging. The nation's at 62.9% and Chicago is at 55.8%. So please respond, tell other people to respond so you can be counted. This only happens every 10 years.
Mentioned this earlier, but there will be a post-presentation Zoom call. So during the Zoom call, you can get to know people a little bit better. There'll be more announcements and breakout group pitches, and then we'll start shortly after the presentation. This link will be posted, but for your convenience, it's right here. It's bit.ly/ChaiHackNight remote Zoom.
So, looks like we are almost at the feature presentation. So basically the Q&A will be, after the presentation, and it'll be in YouTube live chat. So that's how we're doing it. Newer format, but I guarantee it works. So get your questions fired up and ready to go. And now I'd like to turn it over to our presenters for a very exciting COVID-related presentation.
All right, thank you.
There we go. Can you hear me? Cool. Excellent. Cool. So thanks everybody. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us tonight. And we're going to be talking about how the Chicago Reporter and WBEZ teamed up to look at Illinois COVID-19 data. So let's introduce ourselves. I'm David Eads. I am now the data editor at the Marshall Project, but when I was doing this project, I was the editor of design and delivery at the Chicago Reporter. And we have Asraa.
I'm Asraa. I'm an editor at the Chicago Reporter, worked closely with David.
And I'm Paula. I work at WBEZ as an interactive producer.
So back in March, someone had tipped me off to a hidden data set that was being published at that time actually on the state governor's website, eventually on the Illinois Department of Health website. And we did, and so it was just basic COVID counts for the state, and we decided that we should move quickly and start to publish something, and just get it out there and really get on top of this data source that we found, report it out, find out where it came from, and could we rely on it. Meanwhile, across town, Paula Friedrich was finding the same data source. She didn't need an external source to find it. She just found it, but was sort of wondering what the heck do I do with this? And so within a couple of days of starting to work on this, we realized that there was a collaboration that could be in store for us. So since then, we've taken this data and we've published all sorts of different COVID-focused data graphics and editorial products. And Asraa is going to tell you a little bit about those.
Yeah, and I just tweeted a bunch of these links on the Chicago Reporter Twitter account. But first thing we started with was a map. The first available data was broken down by county. The reason we did this was actually not because we were like super into maps. It was because the Reporter isn't a daily news organization, and this was a crisis that was like evolving on a daily basis, and we wanted to kind of create a resource because our staff was only 5 people at the time, so we weren't really well positioned to write stories about every milestone, whether it's like the first death or the first 1,000 cases. So this was kind of a way to provide something to our readers that we could update with the data, so it would be more of a resource since we couldn't publish on every twist and turn of this rapidly evolving pandemic. From there, we quickly went to time series. This was kind of a natural progression. It was also kind of taking cues from the national conversation. Like, I think from the get-go, this crisis has been a national story that's understood graphically. Like, flatten the curve is a hashtag about a graphic. There's no like physical curve that exists in the real world. So seeing that play out on national outlets and on social media, that this was how people were engaging and understanding what in some ways was an invisible crisis that was turning everything upside down, we figured we could add value by kind of doing that locally instead of on the national or the global level. From there, we found out that there was data available on the zip code level. And also by this point, a lot of national and international outlets had a lot of really robust dashboards about state and county level stuff. So we thought this was a really important one that we could uniquely offer to a Chicago or Illinois audience. there's like over 1,500 zip codes in Illinois. So we immediately started thinking about how we can make it more engaging and not just an overwhelming amount of numbers. So David was able to introduce geolocation, where it locates you and tells you exactly what zip code or close enough to what zip code that you're in. So that's that was a zip code tracker, which was more granular than the other stuff that we had and more granular than a lot of the other tools that were out there. After that, we, then the conversation went to reopening, and there was no data feed about reopening because every state, and in some cases, every municipality had a different approach to reopening. So we'll talk about this a little bit more, but then we kind of went to creating a graphical, design-driven approach to something that's reported with words, but isn't like a live data feed on the IDPH website. And then from there, the most recent thing we did was Chicago Public School Tracker, the Chicago Public School Reopening Tracker. Their current plan is a hybrid model, and it differs depending on grade level and learning situation. It has changed several times in the few weeks that it's been introduced. So Paula took the lead with creating this kind of simple breakdown for people to immediately get to the details that apply to like the CPS students in there that they know personally.
Yeah, so we'll talk through a little bit our thought process in creating these, and a little bit of like the design decisions that went into them as well. So there are kind of 3 or 4 main things that we're hoping to accomplish with these. The first thing is to help our audience locate themselves in the places they care about. This idea of like geolocation, like the tools quickly automatically locate you to where you are and show you what's most relevant to you and your surrounding area. So that was really a driving design decision. So the slide with all the different Illinois states is just a look at kind of how we thought about how do we present what we're doing here, which is, locating you in the region that's relevant to you. And the same thing with the zip code map. It allows you to zoom in on your zip code, and then we, made some design decisions about people were using the map as navigation, so really putting that at the forefront and downplaying sort of the drop down. So that's the first point of what we were trying to accomplish with these, and then from there.
Yeah, and I think design was like a big priority and a big guiding principle, I think, in all of these things that we made, because it was an overwhelming amount of information and we wanted it to be mobile friendly, so you could easily scroll through a lot of information on your phone, and then just use a lot of visual cues to help people break down. So like the reopening plan was pretty complicated. It's like 5 phases, 4 regions, all sorts of gradients of what's allowed and what's not allowed. It was different in Chicago than it was for the rest of the state. So trying to use design to help the reader sort through, and also making it very quick and mobile friendly on your phone. Doing this, structuring the reporting as like as data. First, we started in Google Sheets, and then we migrated to Airtable for the reopening trackers. Also helped us pivot more quickly when the state changed things up. So they went from 4 regions to 11 regions. So we were able to kind of build that into the tool and keep it up to date. Also, we wanted to be transparent about the limitations of the data and things that we knew that were incomplete. So for example, we noticed early on, based on some of the reporting our reporters were doing, that the zip code totals didn't seem to match the totals of prisons that we knew were in that zip code. So we put a disclaimer up about that. We also were able to introduce data that's specific to that geography, so people have more context. It's not just raw numbers, but there's some context. So one cool example was City Bureau has this really robust resource guide that is broken down by zip code. So we were able to work with them and surface like a link to resources in the zip code that you're looking up. And another example is census data for every zip code, so that if you see that, like, I don't know, 70% of the cases are Black people, then you would be able to compare that to the population of that zip code, so it's more meaningful. So try to introduce context, but in like a clean and succinct way, so it's not information overload, but it's more clarifying. to really help you understand the dynamic in your locality.
So the third point here is to not duplicate work. Many years ago, I think 2012, 2013, I was at Hack Night and talking about how we need to end the elections data arms race and collaborate as newsrooms and as civic tech organizations on this kind of just essential kind of civic plumbing. And it's, I mean, this has been a through line for Shy Hack Night in this community for a long time. And it's something that we really believe in. Here's a tweet from a producer at the Chicago Sun-Times, who says, "Thanks for saving me from making those coronavirus maps." I mean, in my mind, it's just crazy to think that, every news organization in Chicago or in the state would need to remake essentially the same kinds of data graphics when we could be making higher quality, bilingual, more polished, better products if we're sort of sharing resources. You can see here a couple of the logos of places that have embedded our work. It's over 16, the last I checked, might be even more than that at this point. But you can see it's everything from Univision, a major broadcaster, to Block Club, is sort of that, beat reporting for the 21st century. But then, a suburban blog for parents called Kid List used it. So, we were really able to sort of see a bit, sort of get it out into the world and in front of a lot of people by distributing it this way. And this is because this kind of work is it's just a lot of work. This is the credit list for the New York Times national COVID tracker. It's just a tremendous amount of work to sort of maintain a persistent data resource like this.
Yeah, so right away, I think David had the foresight to really advertise openly that we want people to borrow these and to use these and to create them as embeds so it could easily fit into most CMSs, or we could find a way that a lot of people could use them in their existing website to serve their existing audience. Instead of asking people to point to that thing over there, they could make it part of their news environment. It was also really important to have this embed distributed approach to publishing for the bilingual aspect of it. It was a high priority for us to make these available in Spanish, but we don't have a native Spanish speaking audience. That's why the partnership with Univision was really important, because if we could create the embed that they could easily put on their site and put in their push notifications, and then they could easily get it to the Spanish speaking audience where the Spanish audience actually is, instead of us trying to independently build that audience from scratch. The embed sharing resources approach was really crucial to getting the reach that we did. And the last I checked, it was like more than 1 million people in about more than 1 million users in a little over 4 months. So it definitely broke the records for the Chicago Reporter's traffic, and I think it did really well for BZ as well. But I think the making sure we had other news partners that were free to use it on their site as they wish was really crucial to getting that kind of magnitude.
Yeah, and then we'll talk a little bit about sort of the behind the scenes stuff and the technical pieces of all of this that drives this. So the graphics are powered by Observable, which if you are not familiar with it, I recommend checking it out. It's a pretty fun platform. It's kind of like Google Docs for code. You can import JavaScript modules and you can do some really interesting stuff with it. And we've kind of pushed it pretty far and it's served us pretty well. It's been super easy to collaborate. We've been able to include analytics, translation, IP-based geolocation. You can take a look at our code. It's all public. You can play around with it. You can fork notebooks, so you can literally just like hack away at it and do your own thing with it. And it's a pretty powerful platform, and we've really enjoyed using it. So that's kind of, that's what we've been using to make all this.
So another kind of key thing here is that we're sort of using structured, we're using, some of the first things we showed you were government data, just a straight government data feed, like what you're sort of used to, I think, in the civic hacking scene. But we're also using structured data in other ways, and not necessarily taking measurements from the government, but using databases to model policy. And so what you can see here is the literally the link to the governor. The first thing that you get on the page about the emergency declaration leads to this thing that looks like Abraham Lincoln wrote it. And we sort of took that and put that into Airtable. Initially we used Google Sheets, and then we migrated to Airtable to have a little more robust system. Not going to get too deep into this, but just to go a little bit behind the scenes, we're using Mapbox as a crucial technology for mapping. Shout out for them for their generous support. We're using D3, Turf.js, and a service called ipdata.co for geolocation. Behind the scenes, and we'll talk about this during the breakout group a little bit, we created a reverse proxy to the state's data, and then are using some other technologies to help us out as well. Shout out to City SDK. That's a JavaScript library published by the Census Bureau. It just makes it a lot easier than other systems I found to pull stuff out of the Census API and mash it together with other data sources.
Yeah, and then we'll talk a little bit about how we've seen these used so far and kind of the response we've gotten and what we've learned about our audience. So. Yeah,
so just at a top level, we see that about 78%, almost 80% of our audience is on mobile, either tablet or phones, but the vast majority of those are phones. We definitely see a lot more iOS users still than Android users. And we found that the audience has been very local. At least 77%, I imagine it's actually much higher, but at least 77% we think come from Illinois, and then about 37% of the entire audience comes from Chicago specifically. And we've also seen some very good engagement. So with the zip code map that you saw, about 50% of sessions have some meaningful engagement. And so we mean either they navigated by tapping around on the map, or they picked a zip code from the search box. And using those patterns, we actually were able to make some design choices. So initially, we had the select box above the map. And what we saw was that most people or more people were clicking around the map to navigate on that tool. And so we said, well, I made that design choice, and it was like, well, if people aren't going to use that tool, let's flip it. Let's put the thing that people are interacting with at the top. And actually, by doing that, they interacted with both elements more. So I thought that was very interesting.
Yeah, and we've seen that it's resonated with people. We've seen screenshots posted in Facebook groups. Like here's an example. We added a download button, which researchers have been using this data that we've compiled on the zip code level. School board members have used it to figure out their reopening plans. So people are using this information in really critical ways. I think the other thing that's interesting about sort of seeing them out in the world is you can kind of see like where people still have questions too. Like one of the design changes that we made for the zip map was adding that information about prison counts kind of higher up. Like originally it was a footnote. And just by kind of watching how, like what the conversation was around this stuff when people were posting it on social media, we saw a lot of times people were like, is this in there? Is that in there? And so it was information people were looking for, but they weren't seeing it. And so that helped us kind of continually improved on this stuff too, just watching how people were interacting with it in real life. And people have been pretty grateful just about the the simplicity of this stuff. And as Asraa mentioned, it's a good way for us as news organizations to be on top of changes that might be spread across 3 stories, but it helps us consolidate it into one place and one place for people to find it quickly.
Yeah, and I think you probably have heard that local news and news in general is not in a the industry is not in great shape, but this kind of coverage does take a lot of resources, but a little can go a long way. And I think especially with collaborations like this one, when you donate, it doesn't just help the Chicago Reporter or WBEZ, it helps Univision's audience, Blog Club's audience, etc. Because when we're sharing these resources, our efforts or our different expertise is just going that much further, and not just serving our individual audiences. So PSA to support local news if you can.
Yeah, and I think we've seen with COVID, especially right now, it feels like this kind of coverage is intensely local, especially stuff around reopening the guidelines and data. It varies from city to city, especially in Illinois, you have home rule, and so Chicago has its own rules, and that's different from what the state is laying out. And it takes a lot of work to keep track of. And we've been really lucky in that we've been able to share these resources. And like Asraa said, your dollar does go further when you support. So we're excited about that.
Well, thanks so much. That was really interesting. It's really well designed too. I've definitely looked at it a couple times. So thank you so much for making that and for presenting.
Very awesome. I'm going to immediately support the Chicago Reporter and WBEZ for a monthly donation of $25 recurring. I recommend everyone watching this do that too. But I'm going to do that after, well, I haven't done it yet, but after we do Q&A, which we're about to start.
Flurry of donations.
Mm-hmm.
Do it now. So now it's Q&A time, and you can start putting your Q&As, well, not your A's, just your Q's, your questions in the YouTube chat box, and we will take them in the order they are received, just like when you call on customer service, but not like that. So yeah, we will be reading off your questions, and yeah, we'll get that started now. I think we have a couple of seeded questions just to get the conversation going. Let's see. First question is, how did you spread the word about these tools and graphics to potential users?
I think there's kind of 2 pieces to that. One of that is spreading it to our existing audiences. So a lot of that was thinking about how is this stuff going to play on social, and because that's a lot of where people are going to consume something like this. So we talked about seeing screenshots in Facebook groups. So that was actually just a driving thing that we were thinking about the whole time. How can we make this screenshotable so that people will easily want to share it on their own? And so that as an organization, it makes it easier for us to create engaging posts and content around it off platform. So something that we immediately thought of was, the over time, how do we present that on Twitter, for example, in a way that we give this update? So that was one way of thinking about that. And then the other piece of that is, I think Asraa can speak to a little bit more about how we thought about reaching out to other partners.
Yeah, so we just cold emailed people we know and people we don't know at various different news organizations and saw what kind of pickup we got. Something that helped was that we're the Chicago Reporter is a member of the Chicago Independent Media Alliance. We're part of another collaboration called Lens on Lightfoot. So, some existing relationships, but also just emailing, just doing some research on all sorts of news organizations across the state and just emailing them and seeing who would pick up. It was a very lo-fi outreach effort, but it worked to a certain extent in that people at other newsrooms that were struggling with the same issues or wanted to offer their readers graphics and not just because for example, the reopening tracker, if you miss that Pritzker's latest announcement, if you miss that news story, then the tracker is kind of more helpful because it's like one resource. So just newsrooms that were struggling with the same issue were, eager to adopt it. And yeah.
No, I'll just add that, there's some sort of just organic that the village of Western Springs, is using it, which is a little weird because they are the government. But it's still very useful, and that was completely organic. Kidlist, mykidlist.com. Somebody just saw it on social and said this is useful to my audience for this sort of suburban parenting blog. But what I wanted to say is that this is really to the point of the PSA. There's a lot of hidden work in doing stuff like this, like stuff that's not obviously hard or resource intensive, and this part is one of it. And Asraa did just incredible work to sort of get it out into the world and distribute it. But that's something that's one of those hidden costs that isn't necessarily obvious to readers or even to news organizations at times. But that's really, really critical to making something like this work and sustaining it.
Awesome, thank you. How do you think people have used your data in order to advocate for policy changes related to COVID in the Chicago area and beyond? Or have they? And if so, have they? And if so, how?
Well, I think everybody has examples. One example is that there is an administrator of a school district in the northern suburb, or excuse me, a school in the northern suburbs, who's using these tools to help them understand what kind of policies to implement, basically by looking at the zip codes where their kids come from. And they're also trying to use it as an early warning system to try to find if any of their students live in a zip code where cases are spiking suddenly, to take more precautions.
Yeah, I've also heard from a library director who has been using this and thinking about their reopening. So there's a wide variety of people who have found use in it for sure.
I think researchers also, like this group of epidemiologists from Harvard, the Illinois website only offers like a snapshot of the zip code data, but since we have a download the data button, they were able to get like something more comprehensive, including demographics. So they're not policymakers, but they're able to analyze it for trends and compare that to what's going on nationally. So.
Okay. Do you have any, did you have any hopes for how people would use your data or any kind of more specific objectives?
I think for me, a lot of people are going to work, but in some ways it was just making it more real. Like walking down the street, you don't really see COVID, but seeing in my zip code, there's X amount of cases made it more real. And it also makes it more real than like saying that there's hundreds of thousands in the country. So I think like that was kind of my goal, to give people something tangible to understand how it's happening, because it's and to make the numbers meaningful. I think that was my personal thing that I felt like would add to people trying to navigate this extremely stressful and uncertain situation we're in.
Yeah, and I think especially in the beginning, like now it sort of feels like it's part of everyday life, but especially at the beginning, everything felt so hectic and there felt like there was so much information. I mean, it still feels like there's so much information coming at you all the time. And so I think also we're hoping to just help people cut through the noise a little bit and figure out like, this is what's happening close to me, or this is like how my state is dealing with this reopening thing. And like, I can look up exactly what's happening with indoor dining or whatever it is. And I can look up what it might look like in the next phase, because I don't know, like we're in phase 2 right now. Who knows what it's going to look like in phase 3 or phase 4. And just to help really like, and cutting through the noise was also a little bit of a goal.
So you mentioned the idea of like invisible work, and you showed in terms of like creating graphics like this, and you showed the list of credits for the New York Times graphics that are created. So I'm wondering, how did you get the data?
Come to the breakout group.
Yeah.
No,
Spoiler.
so I mean, this was a very sort of funny thing when we showed this actually to the Harvard folks. I just felt like, you know, like an aerospace engineer had like come to a, you know, garage in Humboldt, you know, a car garage in Humboldt Park, and I'm like, I don't know how it works, but if I whack it with a, you know, I whack it with a wrench, it seems to work okay. But you know, at least what I did, I imagine this is almost identical to what Paula did, is I opened up my browser inspector, looked at the AJAX requests, the XHRs, sorted them by size, and was like, well, the big ones are probably the most interesting. And then by doing that, you know, sort of, you know, we've sort of been able to find these hidden data feeds. And to make it easy on ourselves, again, this will be in the breakout group, what we did was set up a reverse proxy. So basically, instead of like trying to archive the data or anything, at least initially, what we did is just mirror the Illinois Department of Health website, add some headers that make the HTTP requests usable in other websites, and also cache it so that we're not, you know, so that if we get 1,000 requests in a minute, we're only sending the state one. And if the state goes down, we have a little backup. So we just set up this kind of like lightweight infrastructure to sort of access the data, and we've been using it ever since.
Okay, next, I'm gonna mix it up a little bit. Another question. Do you have a plan for what's next with the project? Or are there any features, ideas that were on your wish list that you weren't able to implement yet?
So many. I mean, I think we're always looking back at this and being like, oh man, what if we could do this? Or like, let's try and do this. But we kind of like be a little bit realistic about what we can realistically accomplish and maintain. I think part of it is like the reopening stuff, for example, it just takes a lot of maintenance. So maintenance is on the look forward, but I think we have some other thoughts about where to go with this. I mean, there's a bunch of data to play with. I think some of the historical data on the zip code level, that's something that we're hoping to dig into a little bit more. I don't know if anyone else wants to add to that.
Yeah, there's like there's a lot of data, and then the state will change how it's reporting the data. I think in an effort to provide more data. Like we had the positivity rate graphic when the state was going by 4 regions, and then the state switched to 11 regions. Now we have to like rejigger that to because now they're reporting it in 11 pieces instead of 4 pieces. So like some of it is like there's a lot of features that we want to do and we hope to still do, but just keeping up with maintaining the data feeds, and then also just keeping up with the news. Like the news keeps happening. Like, you know, we didn't know that like the governor would go from a phase system to a tier system. Like now now there's this like so sometimes we're also just trying to keep up with the politics in the states and how they're framing things, which I wouldn't say slows us down, but it just like limits our initial plans of like how we could keep building on the different data feeds that exist in ways that are interesting and useful.
Yeah, that makes sense. So someone asked an Uber nerd question. Does hosting that code via observable mean that it's running on their servers each time a user visits your page, or is that code still run client side?
So it's served up by observable. I mean, it's mostly JavaScript, so most of it is going to run on the you know, in the client browser. But yeah, observable is serving up those embeds. We've had very little issue with any kind of traffic issues. There was one point where I think Heroku, they're on Heroku, and it was having a system-wide issue. And so there was a little intermittency. Other than that, it's been great. You know, I was certainly skeptical about directly embedding observable on web pages for performance reasons. That they try to make the runtime small, but it's still relatively heavy. But by and large, actually, the performance issue, the front end performance issues, I'm responsible for them. Like, the runtime's not that slow to load, and most news websites aren't the fastest to load to begin with. And so, some of the performance issues are just sort of swallowed up in the page load or in reading the prefatory material. So we haven't had major performance issues, and I think and the reliability of observable has been just superb overall.
That's good. Next question. What do you think, or like what differentiates your data visualizations from the many other COVID-related maps out there?
It's a good question. We hope that something that we're asking ourselves all the time too, because we don't, like we said, don't duplicate work is one of our guiding principles. But I think the thing that we're aiming to do is offer more local and more granular information than you might get from a national publication, and that goes for reopening, and that goes for the cases and the deaths and the demographic information. It's definitely something that we're always thinking through and hopefully being critical enough about.
Awesome.
Yeah, I would just add, like I said this earlier, trying to sneak in context so that they're not just numbers, abstract numbers. Being able to compare your zip code to where it ranks in all the zip codes, stuff like that. Trying to make the numbers meaningful, because the numbers can get, overwhelming, and they can just become meaningless because they're just changing pretty rapidly. So.
It does sound like you all had to kind of stumble onto this data feed, which can't be an ideal situation. So what would your ideal experience be for dealing with state government and important state government data?
I mean, they still haven't publicized these feeds. We did privately confirm with them, or via just the normal process of reporting, sort of confirmed with them these were trustworthy and what we thought they were. But certainly, I think just publishing those links and publishing data dictionaries would have been great. And I want to also be careful, because I've looked at some other states' data. I'm now in this job, in a national job where I'm going to have to contend with some of that stuff. And we have it okay in Illinois. Illinois is doing a pretty good job, I would say, compared to most states in relative terms. I would say Illinois is doing a really solid job of just keeping this data up and making sure it's relatively accurate. The medical examiner data that we have in Cook County is unique in the country in its depth and texture and specificity, though it's only about deaths, which really limits what it can say. But it's probably about as good a data situation in Illinois as it is anywhere in the country, which isn't necessarily saying much, but it is something to kind of keep in mind that the states the state's doing an okay job. I think they've got these kind of funny data graphics and stuff that they've created, and from where I sit, I think just publishing those data feeds a little more directly would have been a good thing.
follow-up question to that. Do you have a sense of why they didn't publish them?
Yeah, we don't know. I mean, they do publish them, right? Like they're out there, but they don't publicize them. But yeah, I don't think we don't know.
Imagine they're busy, you know, like we all are right now.
Yeah.
And it's, yeah.
Well, here's a forward-looking question. How can the people at Chai Hack Night help you meet your goals and future plans?
I think sending us feedback on anything that's not working or that's confusing. I think we'd also be open into what information, especially about local data and local plans or whatever it might be, that you feel like isn't being, you know, that like is confusing to you still, or like what information needs do you have that you feel like aren't being served by other publications. Like we're totally open to ideas and suggestions on that front. I think that'd be super helpful.
Has there been any engagement with state government for this way of displaying data? And could it be a path of feedback for the state to help publish information in these more accessible ways?
You know, I emailed them not very early on, but maybe sometime in April, kind of asking about this, and just never got a response.
Yeah, I feel like, yeah, like I said, I think everyone's busy. I also think it's like from a journalist's perspective, I think kind of having a little bit of separation there is good too, because I think journalists bring a different perspective, obviously, than somebody who's working from the government. And I think that's actually an important perspective to think about displaying the information like from a journalist perspective versus someone in the government. So there's that element too. But yeah.
Yeah, and again, not to go like easy on the government or give them a pass, but I also think it's an unusual situation that there's this much public interest in such specific data sets. I don't think the Illinois Department of Public Health has ever had this reality to contend with in this many people. So I think like compared to other states, Illinois has continually updated the data and made it available in different slices and dices. I don't know if David, you can correct me if I'm wrong. They don't make it easy to download the data to analyze.
Yeah, so they don't have historical data. That's a challenge for us as well. Though we've built up a historical data set for some of the stuff that we can use. Yeah, you know, I will say that we picked Mapbox initially because the state was using Mapbox, and so we felt like, well, hey, you know, we might as well use the same system, and so if we come up with any improvements, they can just steal it from us. But you know, I mean, yeah, again, like not to sound super pro government or anything, but you know, people who are not trained to do data visualization, not trained to do, you know, interactive user-facing mapping, and who are paid, you know, anywhere between, you know, 80% or less what they would be making in industry, often, you know, more like 60% of what they'd be making in outside of, you know, in the private sector, are now being asked to serve millions of people this information overnight. And so, you know, I do think we need to be thoughtful about the pressures that they're under right now. Just to deliver this, especially compared to the many states that are either obfuscating their data. You know, a lot of states started with open data feeds and have moved to using technologies like Tableau, which hide the data away and only show you the visualization. So I think there's, or there's even states that have regressed back to PDFs. Hawaii, the only place you could get the numbers was like the head of the health department's Instagram stories for a time. He was just like, I just heard about this from the COVID tracking project today. He would just like screenshot a spreadsheet on his computer and put it on Instagram, and that was like the data release. So so, you know, I think, you know, I do think that there's there's something, you know, we have something fairly solid here.
Yeah, and I would say they don't have like a data dictionary that would have been useful, but they're pretty responsive when you reach out to them, pretty timely, and will, you know, answer your question and answer it again and again if you keep hammering for more detail and clarity. So they've been pretty responsive.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This has been a really fantastic conversation and presentation. And you mentioned something about a breakout group afterwards, although that was a teaser, probably not a spoiler.
Yeah, so I was going to do a quick session on how we found the hidden data feeds, and then how to get those into an observable notebook and start playing around with you know one of the various data feeds. If you're interested, go to observablehq.com and sign up for a free account now. And be ready.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here, and thank you to everyone who's watching for joining, and for all the future watchers, thank you for watching as well. We are going to transition into the post-presentation portion of Chi Hack Night, which is civic hacking. And we're going to post a link to the remote Zoom that everyone can join in our Slack channel, and you can also view it here. So that's all from me, Emily Drevitz, your host number 2.
Yeah, and for me, Claire, host number 1. Let's see. So we got you. Yeah, you can join the Slack channel, join the Zoom call. I see that's on the screen. And yeah, if you want to stick around to breakout groups, you can do, again, look in the Chi Hack Night remote channel, Slack meet at chihacknight.org. Yeah, I don't know if I'm repeating what you just said, Emily. I am a little lost. But anyway, oh yeah, and this broadcast will be posted on YouTube, just to remind everybody. And I think that's it. Please join the breakout groups. It's lots of fun and it's more in-person interaction, or, you know, as in-person it can get right now. So with that, I would say let's do our usual closer.
All right, let's do it. Please go forth and
hack.
Hack.
All right. See y'all later.